Fat, brother. We're too fat. We have too much stuff. We half the things we have we don't even need, and so it is kind of this American dream. Have all the things, have and not that it's wrong. We'll talk about this later. Not that it's wrong to have all the things, but that where's your heart at? Where's your priorities? Are you aligned with Jesus within everything that you're doing? I know for me, I wasn't when I was doing a lot of stuff, overspending, trying to keep up with the Joneses. It wasn't until God really helped me prioritize my life and take me back to a place that I needed to focus on Him, man. I needed to focus my finances on Him. I needed to focus my life on Him.
What is up, everybody? This is Orion and Dustin, and this is the Forged by Faith podcast. All right, everyone. We are back from Christmas, New Year's. It's 2025. Things are looking good in America, and we are going to kick things off today with our 7 Deadly Sins series that we are doing, and this is part 3. We're going to talk about greed. And when we're talking about greed, what we're referring to is this obsessive desire for material wealth or possessions at the expense of ethical considerations. And within our culture, and this is spread all throughout our country, there's this obsession with consumption. We are consumers. We are constantly eating and feeding ourselves. We're constantly buying stuff we don't need. Just go to Costco and you can see the overconsumption as a society that we partake in. And Dustin, before we go into some bullet points on that, what are your kind of initial reactions to our society and the consumption we are in as a whole?
Fat, brother. We're too fat. We have too much stuff. We half the things we have we don't even need, and so it is kind of this American dream. Have all the things, have and not that it's wrong. We'll talk about this later. Not that it's wrong to have all the things, but that, where's your heart at? Where's your priorities? Are you aligned with Jesus within everything that you're doing? I know for me, I wasn't when I was doing a lot of stuff, overspending, trying to keep up with the Joneses. It wasn't until God really helped me prioritize my life and take me back to a place that I needed to focus on Him, man. I needed to focus my finances on Him. I needed to focus my life on Him. That's when I realized, man, this stuff, it's just stuff where moths and thieves destroy, right?
Yeah,
it's important.
Yeah. Well, it's generally a form of idolatry, and the pursuit of material possessions, when that takes precedence over one's devotion to God and ethical living, then we have a problem right there. When people are prioritizing money, shopping, and then owning things they don't need, that's when we're really getting into trouble as an individual right there. And you just said it earlier, it's that keeping up with the Joneses. So when we focus on buying things we can't afford in order to keep up with our neighbors or friends, this can lead to an absolute spiral of debt that can be impossible to escape. And this is not living with devotion to God. This is living devotion to the mighty dollar and idolizing things and possessions and stuff and crap that we don't need.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I moved from a 5,600 square foot house to a 2,000 square foot house, and it was just because I had a conviction, man. I was spending $500 a month to keep my grass green, and I was convicted about it. Is this the best thing for our finances, for our money, for what we're doing? And then you look at the bank interest and it says, you're going to spend $800,000 in interest over the next 30 years. That's what you're donating to the bank for them to own your house and for you to be paying them to live in this house. And I said, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it anymore. And left the system, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's debt, and we'll just say debt slavery for that matter. It can grab a hold of you, and it is so hard to claw your way out of it. And it kind of starts with uh, when you go to college and you get into this student loan thing, and that's kind of what society tells you to do. You've got to go to college, get some worthless degree, and then not only that, you go into debt, and then you come out of this 4 year experience or 6 years, however long, and you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You're behind big time. And then let's say you want to get a house, then you get into more debt, a car, more debt. If you want to keep up with the Joneses and get a boat and an ATV and whatever, more debt. So it's just piling on top of itself. And it's one of those things where when we focus on these possessions that we don't need, that's where we're looking at greed, and we're prioritizing this at the expense of ethical living.
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to buy some things and these things in cash, and your family's taken care of, and you're tithing to your church, and you got things going right, like, yeah, by all means, man. But yeah, to be a slave to debt is not a fun place to be. I don't think it's where the Lord wants us to be. I think He wants us to have financial freedom. That doesn't mean we can't be wealthy. It doesn't mean we can't do well. It just means we need to have our heart in the right place. And mine was in the wrong place for a long time. When I grew up in a single family home. And my mom and dad were not married. Well, they were married and divorced. And so I'd kind of visit him on the weekends and stuff, but we didn't have a lot of money growing up. So when I started doing well financially, man, I started buying all the things, right? And
Yeah.
man, when I had my first kiddo, I had a brand new Toyota Tacoma I couldn't afford. I had all kinds of stuff, and ended up going through a divorce, and ended up having to file bankruptcy, man. Like I was completely undisciplined with my finances. Everyone was giving me a loan because I was making all my payments. All my credit was, very good. But man, it really drove me to a dark place. And so I had to take some authority and dominion over my finances, right? And so it's been a game changer. I'm not going back, man.
Yeah. Now, would you say that affected your marriage and your relationships with family, friends, etc.?
Yeah, I would say so. It seems a little chauvinistic, honestly. A little showy, little trying to, you know, maybe buy my way into I'm better than you, and I'm happier than you because I have all this stuff. Well, when my marriage ended, everything didn't matter at that point, right? Obviously, I've remarried, been happily married for 15 years now, but
Yep.
that was a long time ago. But I can say at the time, none of that stuff mattered when my life wasn't good, and things were falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally get what you're saying. And I do think we're going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the opposite side of this, and building wealth and the differences of using your time, your talents, and your treasures to build God's kingdom. And there's a big difference right there. And I first want to say there's being rich, and then there's being wealthy. When you're rich, that can be an outward looking thing. That could be something along the lines of, hey, I've got a nice house, a nice car, but I don't own any of it. The bank owns that. I'm in debt paying off those things to put on the facade of being rich. When you're wealthy, that spans over a lot of different categories. And wealth, if you look at the Latin word, it comes from divite, which in its plural form denotes abundance and prosperity. So we actually want to strive for wealth, not just financially, but we also want to strive for physical wealth or abundance. We want to strive for health, abundance in our health, mental abundance, and then spiritual abundance. So we want to strive. We want to, first of all, delineate between the two. There's rich and wealthy. And when we're focusing on being wealthy, that encompasses a lot of different categories. And we want to focus in on building that wealth in multiple categories of our life. And that's where we really start to connect with God, and we really start to live in an ethical way that allows us to, yes, we're going to make money. We're building our financial wealth, but we're also going to then use that for good, for the sake of building God's kingdom.
Yeah, 100%, man. It's all about, Lord, what do you want me to do with my money? How do you want me to invest? What do you want me to do in a way that honors you? And when we're putting our money in things that doesn't honor God, I mean, we're just setting ourselves up for failure, and it's just a matter of time before, what we think is a castle is going to be in shambles or collapsed or bankrupt one day.
Yeah. And I really like this Bible verse. It's from Luke 12:15. Then he said, beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. And I think that really hits hard right there. And I'm going to layer on top of that another concept. And this was a big one for me. And when I had this realization, it kind of, was my light bulb moment. And God grants us stewardship over our finances and over our assets. So all our possessions, everything we quote unquote own, God owns those. God is allowing us temporary control or stewardship over these items and assets that are in our domain. And once I had that realization, this was a couple years back, that was kind of my light bulb moment. I don't own my house. I don't own my car. I don't
Yeah.
own my assets and my investments. God is allowing me stewardship over those things. And once you see that, it makes total sense. God is letting you use those things, and you're going to use those hopefully for good and to build God's kingdom and to steward those items and assets well. But you, me, Dustin, whoever, you don't own those objects. They're not yours.
Yeah, yeah, and rich and wealthy. I know we're talking about specific money here, but like, what does that mean to a man? What does that mean to an individual as far as being rich to me now is having Christ in my heart. Um, Money comes and goes, man. I can make a lot and I can make a little. It comes and goes as long as my family's taken care of, as long as my investments are going well, and like I've am honoring Christ with my money, man. I'm a rich man. It doesn't mean I have to have a multi-millions of dollars in the bank. If so, cool. I'll still honor God with that, but I think being wealthy, being rich, we gotta look back and think, am I rich in Christ? Is my heart in the right position? Am I allowing Him to be number one in my life?
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's layer on one more thing. And we already alluded to this, but when you do have money and you do have items and assets that God is allowing you to have stewardship over, how are you using those things to build God's kingdom? So if you have, let's say, you're a multimillionaire, a decamillionaire, are you using that money and that wealth God has given you, that financial wealth God has given you, to be greedy, to be some sort of a Scrooge and not pay it forward? Or are you using that money to build God's kingdom? Are you using that money to help other people, to mentor young men? How are you using what God has given you stewardship over? And that's, it kind of boils down to that. And I was talking to some young men about this a couple weeks back. When you're a young guy, if you're 20 years old, your ability to pay it forward isn't going to be that much. You're not going to be able to, you might not be able to even afford your own rent and grocery bills. But once you start to establish yourself and you get older and you're in your 30s and your 40s and you've gone through your multiple business opportunities and entrepreneurship and you do have money, that's when you're going to want to pay it forward. And one thing that I can't stand seeing is when you get these older guys who have a bunch of money and they don't do anything with it. They don't pay it forward. They don't help anybody else out. They don't mentor anybody. They have their boat. They have their ATV. They have their airplane. We won't mention anyone's name on that one. They have these things. They're obsessed with consumption. They have all the things, but they're not doing anything to build God's kingdom. They see it as theirs and not something God has given them stewardship over. So it's kind of an arc there. When you're young, yeah, you might not be able to pay it forward and use your money to build God's kingdom. But when you're old, yeah, you better be doing something with what God has given you.
It will all end up in the junkyard someday. But what will not end up in the junkyard is your soul, is your heart, is your everlasting Father who calls us to a place of investing in His kingdom. He says, invest in the things of heaven because those things will actually last. Um, you invest in earthly things where moths and rust destroy. You know, is that an investment, or is that just filling an empty hole that eventually just remains empty because it's just another thing, right? Just stuff. Just it doesn't matter, right? And so again, it's not wrong to have those things as long as your heart's right, your money's right, you're serving God with your finances and what you're doing. I think that's the most important part.
Absolutely. Well, we will wrap things up right there, you guys. Next week, we will dig into part number 4, which is sloth. It's going to be a fun one to talk about since we're in the new year, 2025, and a lot of people have ambition to get in shape, but it's not necessarily sloth of a physical, your physical well-being. It can be spiritual as well. So we're going to dive into that next week. Thanks for listening, guys. And join us next week for a new episode of the Forged by Faith podcast.